I'm Dana Granger, and I was 32 years old the morning I watched my own father do something so quiet and so cruel that I will spend the rest of my life trying to understand how a man can smile while he does it. He crouched in front of his mother in an airport lounge. He took both of her hands in his. He used the warm, gentle voice he saved for clients and for funerals, and he told her, "Just sit here, sweetheart, we'll check in and come right back." My grandmother had Alzheimer's. She believed him for about 4 minutes. So did I. What my father did not know, what none of them knew, was that the daughter they raised was a nurse. And nurses are trained for exactly one thing above all others. When the room goes wrong, we start writing down the time. I wrote down the time. I wrote down every single minute of what came next. And 11 months later, a judge in Buffalo County, Nebraska, looked across her courtroom at my father in his good gray suit, and used one word that took everything from him. Unfit. This is the story of a one-way ticket bought 11 days before a smile. A folded boarding pass I still keep in a drawer. And the moment a quiet woman everyone underestimated decided that the people closest to her had finally crossed a line that no one was ever going to cross again. Settle in. Pour yourself something warm. And if stories about ordinary women and impossible families and the moment the line finally gets drawn are the kind of stories that keep you up at night the way they keep me up, then stay with me all the way to the end, because what happened in that courtroom is not even the part that breaks me. The part that breaks me happened in a garden the following spring, and I have never told it the way I am about to tell it now. Drop a comment before we start. Tell me where you are watching from. And if you have ever been the one in your family who shows up. Subscribe. Because the next part of this story is for you. I grew up with 2 families folded inside one. There were my parents in Lincoln. A house with a 3-car garage. A lawn cut in diagonal stripes every Saturday morning whether it needed it or not. My father Raymond sold insurance and smelled like cologne and certainty. My mother Carol ran the house the way other women run small museums. They loved the photograph of the family more than they ever loved the work of being one. And then there was my grandmother Edith. 2 hours west on Interstate 80. 160 acres of soft rolling Nebraska land just outside Kearney. A farmhouse that smelled like dust and dried lavender and bread. A woman who taught me to weed a row before I could read. Who hummed old hymns over the kitchen sink. Who let me stay up past bedtime shelling peas on the back porch while the fireflies came up out of the grass. When I grew up and became a geriatric nurse, people told me I had a gift for the elderly. I did not have a gift. I had Edith. The year all of this began, I was between travel contracts. Living alone in a small rental on the east side of Lincoln. Which is a polite way of saying I was the one in the family with time. And in families like mine, the one with time becomes the one with the job. My grandmother had been moved off the farm a year earlier into my parents' guest room. So we can help her, my mother said. I should have heard the quotation marks around those words. I did not. The first strange thing was small. So small I almost missed it. My mother, who had hated dirt under her nails her entire life, suddenly wanted to talk about the farm. Land values. Acreage. Whether the old place was really worth keeping. I told myself she was tired. Caregiving wears people thin, and I know that better than anyone. That is the thing about the people you love. You give them the benefit of the doubt long after they have stopped earning it. I gave mine right up until a gate agent called the flight. The week before the trip, my father asked me a question that did not belong in his mouth. Do you happen to know where the deed to the farm is kept? We were standing at his kitchen island. He asked it the way another man might ask about a spare key. I told him I did not. And I watched him not be disappointed enough. 2 days later, my mother slid a brochure across that same counter. A memory care community. Glossy. A fountain on the cover. It would be so good for her, she said. Professionals around the clock. I am a nurse. I know good memory care exists. I also know what it costs, and that brochure was not printing the number. So I did what I would tell any family to do. I asked to see the paperwork. Which facility? What the admission date was. Whether they had toured it. I said I wanted all of us at one table before anything moved. My mother smiled. And she changed the subject to the trip. That was the new plan apparently. A family reconciliation trip to Arizona. The four of us plus Grandma. To look at a condo they were thinking of buying. It sounded almost sweet. It sounded like the kind of thing functional families do. I had a bad feeling. The low kind that sits underneath your ribs and will not lie down. But I had no proof and no good reason to refuse a trip framed as healing. So I said yes. And I told myself I would ask my questions again at the gate. Here is the part one want you to hear, because I have replayed it 1,000 times since. I saw the warning. I asked the questions. I just did not know they had already bought the ticket that made my questions too late. Eppley Airfield in Omaha is an hour up the interstate from Lincoln. We made it in good time on a Tuesday morning in early October. My grandmother sat between me and the window of the rental car, holding my hand the whole way. Her fingers cool and smelling of the lavender hand cream she had used my entire life. At the airport she got nervous the way she always did in crowds. So I kept her close while my parents handled the bags. We ended up in one of the lounges near the gates. The kind with low chairs and a coffee machine and too much glass. My father settled my grandmother into a chair by the window. He crouched in front of her. He took both her hands. And he used his warmest voice. Just sit here. We'll check in and come right back. She nodded. The way a child being good nods. I almost let it go. But that bad feeling under my ribs stood up and spoke. So I told my parents I would be right back, and stepped 20 feet away to make a phone call. And on my way I noticed my father stop at the gate desk and lean in to say a few quiet words to the young agent behind the counter. I figured he was asking about our seats. I phoned the memory care community on the brochure. The one in Arizona. To confirm the arrangements I had never been shown. A pleasant woman put me on a brief hold. And then she came back and said the words that rearranged my entire life. I'm sorry. We have no admission under that name. We have no record of any Granger at all. I turned around mid-sentence. The chairs where my parents had been sitting were empty. Their carry-ons were gone. My grandmother sat alone by the window. Exactly where she had been told to sit. Her purse in her lap. A folded boarding pass in her hand. Waiting for two people who had already walked through security and out of her life. Just sit here. We'll come right back. They never intended to come back at all. I want to tell you that I screamed. I did not. Something in me went very quiet and very fast at the same time. The way it does in a hospital code, when there is no room left for feeling and only room for doing. I crossed the lounge. And the chair by the window was empty now too. For one terrible second I thought they had taken her after all. Or that she had wandered. The floor went soft under me. I have lost patients before. I have signed death certificates with steady hands. And I have never in my life felt the cold I felt in that second standing in a Nebraska airport lounge thinking I had let my grandmother walk out of a building she could not find her way back into. Then I heard it. Underneath the gate announcements and the rolling luggage. Humming. Low and tuneless and absolutely hers. My grandmother hummed when she was frightened. The same old hymn her whole life. The one my late grandfather used to sing to her in the garden at dawn. I followed the sound around a bank of chairs. And I found her. Standing near the window. Showing a folded photograph to a young woman in an airline uniform. And this is my Walter, my grandmother was telling her. Pointing at a man 6 years dead. He sings to me. The gate agent looked up at me with the kind helpless face people get around dementia. I told her I was family. That I was a nurse. That I had her. And then my grandmother turned. And for one moment the fog lifted the way it sometimes did. Sudden and bright and cruelly brief. She looked at me. Really looked. And her whole face softened. There you are, she said. I knew you would come back. I have caught newborns. I have pressed on stopped hearts. I have signed the bottoms of death certificates with steady hands. My hands were not steady then. I knelt down in front of her. I took the boarding pass out of her fingers. And I folded it once more into a small hard square, and put it in my own pocket. A one-way ticket. To a city she had no reason to fly to. Bought for a woman who would be found alone and become someone else's problem. They thought she would not understand what had happened to her. The trouble was, I understood it perfectly. There is a version of this story where I fall apart in that lounge. And I would understand it. But I had a confused, dehydrated 82-year-old woman in front of me. And panic does not help a patient. So I worked. I got her sitting again. I got water into her in small sips. I checked her color. I checked her pulse at the wrist out of habit. She was tired and rattled, but physically all right. Then I did the thing nursing beats into you over 1,000 bad nights. I started writing down the time. I opened the notes app on my phone and I logged it. The hour we arrived. The time my father said we will come right back. The time the facility told me there was no admission. The time I found her alone. I photographed the empty chairs. I photographed the boarding pass front and back before it went into my pocket. I called my father. It rang twice and went to voicemail. Which means he saw my name and pressed the side button. I called my mother. A text came back within a minute. And I have kept it. I will keep it until the day I die. Don't make this dramatic. We've earned a rest. She's in good hands with you. Earned a rest. Good hands. As if abandoning a woman with Alzheimer's in an airport were a spa day they had budgeted for. I sat with my grandmother's head against my shoulder while she hummed herself calm. And I felt something settle in me that has never fully left. It was not rage. Rage is loud and useless. This was quieter. And far more dangerous to them. It was the cold, clear focus of someone who knows exactly how systems work, and has just decided to use every single one of them. They had left a paper trail without meaning to. And I am very good with paper. The first practical problem was where to take her. I could not bring her back to my parents' house in Lincoln. They were not there. They had boarded their own flight to Phoenix to go look at that retirement condo. The one this whole family trip had really been about. I learned that later. I suspected it in the parking garage. So I drove us the hour back down to Lincoln. To my little rental. And I got her settled on my couch with a blanket and the television turned low. She slept 12 hours. I did not sleep at all. By morning I knew my apartment would not hold her. It was small. It had stairs. And worst of all, it was strange to her. Strangeness is the enemy in dementia. There was only one place left on earth that my grandmother's brain still trusted. The farm. I was not naive about how it might look. I am a nurse. I knew moving a woman who could not consent carried its own risks. I knew my father would find a way to call it kidnapping. But you do not hand a vulnerable patient back to the people who abandoned her 12 hours earlier. Not when her safety is the entire question. So once she had eaten, I packed a bag. I buckled her into the passenger seat. And I pointed the car west. 2 hours on Interstate 80. The flat gold fields rolling by. The Kearney exit coming up like an old promise. The farmhouse key was where it had always been. Under the loose brick by the propane tank. And it still turned the lock. Inside, the air smelled like dust and dried lavender, and the particular mustiness of a house missing its person. My grandmother walked in. Set her purse on the same hook she had used for 50 years. And her shoulders came down 2 inches. "I'll start the coffee," she said. Clear as a bell. And went to a kitchen she suddenly remembered. I stood in the doorway and watched her hands find the percolator without her eyes. The disease takes so much. But the body holds the places we loved the longest. I did not know yet what I would have to fight to keep her here. I just knew I was not taking her anywhere else ever again. The farm told on them before the family did. I spent that first day opening windows and wiping a year of grime off the counters. Half listening as my grandmother drifted between the present and 1974. She told me about Walter. About the garden. About the lavender rose she had planted for the bees and for the smell of a thing that does not quit. Not one word about lawyers. Not one word about money. Whatever my parents were after, she was not guarding it. She had long since let it go where the rest of her recent life had gone. Then I cleared a stack of mail and circulars off the kitchen table. And underneath it, I found something that stopped my hands. A glossy folder from a realty company in Kearney. Prairie Line Realty. Inside, a comparative market analysis on the farm. The full 160 acres. Complete with an estimated sale price that had a comma in a place that turned my stomach. Clipped to it, a draft listing agreement. Half filled out. Unsigned. Dated 3 weeks earlier. With my father's name typed into the seller line. He had gotten the agent that far, I would learn later, by telling her he was about to be appointed to handle his mother's affairs. Which was simply a lie. 3 weeks before the trip. Before the lounge. Before the smiles. My parents had walked a stranger across my grandmother's land. Taken photographs of her home. And priced it for sale. And they had never once asked the woman who owned it. They had not asked her because they could not. She could not understand the question anymore. Which raised the only question that mattered to me. Standing there in her kitchen with her humming in the next room. If my grandmother could not consent to sell her own farm, then by what authority did my father think he could sell it for her? I did not know the answer yet. But I knew exactly who to call to find out. My parents were back from Arizona within 3 days. And the phone calls started immediately. My mother went first. All warmth and reason. "Sweetheart, this has gone far enough. Bring her back to Lincoln. You are not equipped to do this alone." I almost laughed. "I do this for a living." My father took a harder line. "You do not get to just take her, Dana. There are decisions being made for her welfare, and you are interfering. Decisions made for her welfare. By the people who had left her in a lounge. But it was my Uncle Wes who told the truth. Because Wes has never been able to hold a thought in without it spilling out the bottom. Wes ran an auto shop down in Grand Island. And Wes had money problems the family pretended not to see. He called me himself. Skipping the pleasantries. "Look. The farm has to sell this quarter. It just does. So whatever you think you are doing, You are costing all of us. There it was. Not her welfare. The quarter. I asked Wes as evenly as I could how exactly they planned to sell a farm that belonged to a living woman who had not agreed to anything. He went quiet. Then he said something that turned the low feeling under my ribs into a plan. Your dad is handling that. There is a process. We just need her looked at by a doctor. Declared. You know. Then it's clean. Declared. They wanted her declared incompetent. Not to protect her, but to take the wheel of her estate and drive it straight to a closing table. My mother let the same word slip on the next call. Dressed up nicer. A competency evaluation. It is just paperwork, Dana. It is never just paperwork. And I was about to make sure they learned that the expensive way. I did not argue with them anymore after that. Arguing was what they wanted. Because an argument is just noise. And noise goes nowhere. Instead I called a lawyer. Not a flashy one. An elder law attorney in Kearney named Gene Howerton. A man in his late 60s, who had been practicing in Buffalo County since before I was born, and who answered his own phone. I told him everything in order. The way I had been trained to give report at a shift change. The trip. The lounge. The phone call to the facility that did not exist. The boarding pass. The listing agreement dated 3 weeks before the flight. The competency evaluation they wanted. He let me finish without interrupting. Which is its own kind of mercy. Then he said something that told me I had called the right man. You did 3 things right in the first hour that most families never think to do. You wrote down the times. You took photographs. And you kept her with you instead of handing her back. He paused. And no. Taking her somewhere safe was not kidnapping. No matter what your father says. When the people responsible for a vulnerable adult abandon her. Getting her to safety is exactly what the law expects. We will paper it properly, and we will do it fast. Then quieter. Tell me you kept the boarding pass. I told him it was in my wallet, that very minute. I want to pause here. Because some of you watching know exactly how this feels. You are the one who shows up. You are the one everyone calls when it is hard and somehow never when it is easy. You have been told you are good at this. Which is how families turn a person into a service. If that is you, stay with me. Because this is the part where she stops being the only one who shows up. And starts being the one who is ready. Subscribe so the next quiet woman carrying her whole family alone can find this story when she needs it. Drop a comment below and tell me. Are you the one in your family? Because I want to know who is watching. Now, back to Mr. Howerton. And what he told me about the law. Before I tell you the law, I have to tell you what it cost. Because nothing about this was clean or easy. My parents got to the family first. They were always better at the story than at the truth. By the end of that week, half the relatives believed I had taken Grandma in some fit of drama. That I had cut her off from her loving son and daughter-in-law. That I was unstable. Overworked. Maybe a little unwell. My father is very good at looking concerned. My mother cries on cue. Against 2 people, who look that good in church clothes, a tired nurse, who works nights, does not stand a chance in the rumor mill. My phone filled with messages from aunts and cousins. Some confused. Some cold. One great aunt called to tell me in a voice dripping with worry that my mother was just sick about the money you are spending of Edith's. That one landed. I will admit. Because here is my particular weakness. The one I have had to learn the hard way. I am the woman who does everything alone. I do not ask for help. I do not build a team. I carry it and tell myself that needing no one is the same as being strong. So when the family closed ranks against me, my first instinct was not to call allies. I did not have any. I had spent my whole life being the one others leaned on. And I had never once practiced leaning back. I sat in my grandmother's kitchen that night feeling more outnumbered than I had ever felt in my life. With one confused old woman asleep down the hall. And a folder full of paper that I was not yet sure was enough. And then I remembered the one thing they kept saying. They kept saying she would not know. And I started to understand that they had no idea what she knew. I went back through every message and call from the weeks before the trip. Reading them the way you read a chart on a patient who crashed. Looking for the moment it all went wrong. And there it was. In a voicemail my mother had left me the night before we drove to Omaha. One I had only half listened to at the time. She had been talking fast. The way she does when she has convinced herself of something. Honestly, Dana. The doctors say she is barely there. She will not even know we are gone. She will not even know we are gone. I sat with that for a long time. And then I found the text thread. The one I should not have been able to see but could. Because my father had once added me to a family group and never removed me. He had written it to Wes weeks earlier. Casual as anything. Don't worry about Mom. The farm is basically mine anyway. Just need to move her along. The farm is basically mine anyway. Just need to move her along. Move her along. Like cattle. Like inventory. Like a chair you carry to the curb. And underneath the disgust. Something useful clarified for me. This was not a family that had cracked under the unbearable weight of caregiving. Though they would certainly tell the judge it was. This was a calculation. They had decided in advance and in writing that an old woman's mind was gone. That her land was theirs. And that the most efficient way to collect was to lose her somewhere far away, and let the state sort it out. They had done the math on her. What they had forgotten is that I do math too. And the most expensive miscalculation they made was not the listing agreement. It was not the one-way ticket. It was the assumption hiding underneath every cruel word. They thought she would not know. She knew. She knew exactly who walked away. And she knew exactly who came back. I will not pretend caring for her was easy. Because that would dishonor everyone watching this who actually does it. The nights were the worst. Dementia gets louder when the sun goes down. They call it sundowning. And there is no chart that prepares you for the woman who raised you not knowing your face at 2 o'clock in the morning. She would get up. Frightened. Looking for Walter. Looking for a baby long grown. The thing that worked. The only thing. Was her own garden. I would take her hands and rub the lavender cream into them. The same scent from the same brand she had used for 40 years. And I would walk her to the back window where her lavender rose used to be. They had gone to seed and weed in the years she was away. Grey and leggy and half dead in the dark. But she would look at them and something in her would quiet. And she would tell me every time, as if for the first time, that lavender is the one plant that smells better after you cut it back. I started to think she was telling me something more than gardening. In the middle of one of those nights. Headlights swung across the kitchen wall. My Uncle Wes. Unannounced. 11 o'clock at night. Just wanting to talk. He did not want to talk. He wanted to walk through the house. I watched him drift toward the old roll-top desk. Opening drawers. Lifting papers. His eyes hunting. Finally he turned to me. And he asked the question that told me how blind they were flying. Where does she keep the deed, Dana? We cannot find the deed to the farm anywhere. I almost smiled. They had planned to sell 160 acres. And they did not even have the paper that said it was theirs to sell. Because it was not. And they were about to find out exactly how it was not. The thing that changed everything was not a letter, or a secret will. It was 30 seconds of grainy footage. Mr. Howerton had told me to report the abandonment to Adult Protective Services. And I had. The very next day. To a caseworker named Marion Doyle. Marion had 30 years of watching families do terrible things to their elders. And nothing in my story surprised her. Which was somehow the most chilling part. She moved faster than I expected. She requested the airport security footage before it could cycle off the system. And a week later she called and asked me to come in and watch it with her. I want to be honest about what I expected. I expected confusion. A crowded lounge. A misunderstanding. Maybe even an accident I could have forgiven. That is not what the camera showed. The camera showed my father crouching in front of my grandmother, and taking her hands exactly as I remembered. It showed him stand. Say something. Pat her shoulder. Then it showed him turn and walk away. And here is the detail I will carry to my own grave. Halfway across that lounge. With his mother sitting alone behind him. My father lifted his wrist. And he checked his watch. He was not fleeing. He was not overwhelmed. He was on schedule. My mother appeared at the edge of the frame. Glanced back once. And the two of them walked together toward security without breaking stride. The way you leave a gate. Not the way you leave your mother. Marion let the clip run to the end. Then froze it on the empty chair. I've done this a long time, she said quietly. That is not a family that fell apart. That is a plan. I asked her to print the still of him checking his watch. It was not a confused old woman wandering off. It was a man on his way somewhere. Glancing at the time. Leaving the woman who raised him behind like a layover he did not intend to make. I drove to Howerton's office with that still photograph in a folder. And I asked him to teach me the rules. All of them. So that I would never again be the last to understand my own family's plan. He poured bad coffee. And he walked me through it slowly. My grandmother, he explained, no longer had the capacity to sign anything. That door was closed. She could not grant me power of attorney now. Any more than she could sell the farm to my father. The only lawful path left ran through the courthouse. And it had two parts. Guardianship. Which is authority over the person. Where she lives and how she is cared for. And conservatorship. Which is authority over the property. The money. The land. A court appoints both, he said. And the court's only loyalty is to her best interest. People assume the son gets it automatically, he told me. He does not. The judge weighs who is suitable. And the court can pass right over a closer relative if that person is unfit. Or if their interests collide with hers. Then he said the sentence that turned the whole thing around in my chest. A conservator cannot simply sell a ward's real estate to pay his own debts. Selling her land takes a separate petition. And the judge's approval. No court in this state signs off on selling grandma's farm to bail out her son's auto shop. I sat there. And I let it sink in. My parents' entire scheme rested on a foundation that did not exist. They thought losing her would hand them the land. Instead, the act of losing her was the single best piece of evidence I could possibly bring to a judge deciding who was fit to protect her. Their weapon. And my weapon. Were about to turn out to be the same thing. They just did not know I was the one holding it. That night I took the boarding pass out of my wallet and really looked at it. The way you look at an X-ray once you know what the shadow means. I had been carrying it as a wound. Now I started reading it as a record. It was one way. Not round trip. Not part of a family vacation package. A single seat. Going one direction. To a city my grandmother had no reason on earth to fly to alone. And printed along the bottom was the purchase date. The ticket had been bought 11 days before the trip. 11 days. Before the smiles. Before the family reconciliation. Before my father crouched down and promised he would come right back. He had already purchased a one-way ticket that would carry his mother somewhere far from home. Where a confused woman found alone would be processed by strangers and quietly become a ward of some other county. The trip was not reconciliation. The trip was logistics. I called Marion Doyle the next morning. And I told her about the purchase date. And asked whether the airline kept records of who bought the ticket and when. She said they did. And that with the abandonment report open those records could be requested through the proper channels along with the camera footage already in hand. I added it to the folder. The folder was getting thick now. And every page in it was something my parents had created themselves and handed to me without realizing. The listing agreement they had signed. The voicemail my mother left. The text my father sent. The footage. The ticket. I had not dug up a single secret. I had simply refused to throw away anything they gave me. And they were about to give me one more gift. They were about to take me to court. They struck first. The way people do when they think speed looks like confidence. I was served on a Thursday. Standing in my grandmother's kitchen with flour on my hands. By a process server, who looked genuinely sorry about it. My father and my uncle had filed a petition for guardianship and conservatorship of Edith Granger. Their petition named me, of course. According to the paperwork. I was the problem. I had removed the ward from her established residence. Isolated her from her immediate family. And was exercising undue influence over a vulnerable adult. Likely it implied. To get my hands on her estate. I had to read it twice. Because the gall of it took a minute to register. The two people who had bought a one-way ticket and left her in an airport were petitioning a court to protect her from me. The arsonist had called the fire department to report the homeowner. I will tell you the honest truth about how it felt. For about an hour it felt like losing. They had money for lawyers. And a story polished by years of telling. I had a folder. And a night shift nurse's salary. And a grandmother who could not testify on her own behalf. But Howerton, when I called him in something close to panic, sounded almost pleased. Good, he said. Let them file. Now there is a hearing. Now a judge has to look at all of it in one room on the record. And Dana. Everything they did to her gets entered into evidence whether they like it or not. A hearing. A date on the calendar. One room. One judge. And every piece of paper they had ever created laid side by side with their faces. I stopped feeling like I was losing. I started getting ready. The lawyer they hired was the expensive kind. And his first move was to suggest through Howerton that we could all make this go away quietly if I returned Grandma and stepped aside. His second move, when I declined, was to start hinting at things about me. That I was unstable. That night shift workers are unreliable. That a single woman who had inserted herself into an inheritance had obvious motives. I felt the old urge rise up. The urge to fight dirty back. To dig into my father's debts and my uncle's failing shop and my mother's pill cabinet. To throw mud until everyone was filthy. Howerton talked me out of it in one sentence. You do not win this by proving they are bad people, he said. You win it by proving you are the safe one. So we built a file. Not a smear. We gathered the things a judge actually weighs. We got a formal capacity evaluation from her physician documenting exactly what she could and could not understand. So no one could pretend I was hiding a competent woman. I printed my care log. Every medication and meal and bad night. Dated and timed in a nurse's plain hand. We had the Protective Services report. The camera still. The airline purchase records. The listing agreement. The voicemail. The text. And we had my license. My 12 years of caring for exactly this kind of patient. My whole boring competent life laid out as the thing it had always quietly been. A qualification. I was not going to walk into that courtroom hot. I was going to walk in prepared. The way I walk into every room where someone's life is on the line. Let them bring the theater. I was bringing the truth in a binder with tabs. I gained 2 witnesses in the weeks before the hearing. And neither one of them was family. Which tells you something about my family. The first was the gate agent. Her name was Teresa. And she was the young woman my grandmother had shown the photograph to in the lounge. Marion Doyle had tracked her down through the airline. Teresa remembered the whole thing. Because how do you forget it? She remembered an elderly woman clearly confused sitting alone. And a man and woman she had seen leave her there. And she remembered most of all something my father had said to her at the desk on his way past. Almost as an aside. He had told her. In case anyone asked. That someone would be along for the older lady. Someone. Not her granddaughter is right there. Just someone. Eventually. To deal with the older lady. Teresa agreed to say so under oath. My second witness was old Mr. Vogel. The Granger's nearest neighbor for 60 years. Whose land ran up against ours. He could not speak to airports or paperwork. But he could speak to who Edith was. And who showed up. He told me how every spring he used to hear my grandfather singing that same hymn to Grandma out in the lavender at dawn. The one she still hummed when she was scared. He told me Edith had asked about me by name all year. Even as the rest of her slipped. Even in the house in Lincoln. When my parents told her I was too busy to visit. That one I had to sit down for. They had told her I had abandoned her. All while planning to abandon her themselves. She had hummed her way through it. Holding on to a granddaughter she had been told was not coming. And then one day in an airport. That granddaughter came back. My mother came to the farm alone a week before the hearing. I almost did not let her in. But she stood on the porch looking smaller than I had ever seen her. And some stubborn part of me still wanted to understand. So I put the kettle on. She did not ask to see Grandma. She sat at the kitchen table. And for the first time in my life she told me the truth. Or her version of it. You do not know what this year was, she said. She got up at 3 every night. She did not know me. She called me a thief in my own house. I gave up everything to care for her. And she looked at me like a stranger. And here is the part one will not lie about. Because the story is not honest otherwise. For a moment I felt for her. Caregiving without help breaks people. I have watched it break stronger people than my mother. The exhaustion in her face was real. The grief was real. If she had said the next words. And I broke. And I am sorry. I might have found a way to forgive her. She did not. She wiped her eyes. Straightened her spine. And said. So you have to understand. She would not have known the difference. She will not even know we are gone. There it was again. The same words. The same math. She was not asking for forgiveness. She was asking me to agree that what they had done was reasonable. Because the cost to her had been high. I set down my cup. "Mom," I said. She knew exactly who walked away. And she knew exactly who came back. "You still do not understand what the problem is. Do you?" She left without finishing her tea. I never doubted again. After she left, I made the decision the whole rest of my life would hang on. I had a choice. And Howerton laid it out fairly. We could settle. They might, under the weight of the evidence, agree to drop their petition and quietly let me keep her. If I agreed to keep the worst of it out of the record. Or we could go to the hearing and put all of it in front of a judge. On the record. In public. With my parents in the room. The quiet way would protect the family name. The loud way would protect every other family that has someone like my grandmother. And someone like my father. I thought about Teresa. Who remembered an old woman alone. I thought about Marion. Who had watched that footage with 30 years of practice and called it a plan. I thought about the listing agreement dated 3 weeks before the Smiles. And I decided that the family name had been protecting the wrong people for far too long. I would take her home to this farm. Legally. And for good. And I would do it in the daylight. Where everyone could see. I want to say something to you directly. Because I know who is watching. Somewhere out there is a woman about to step away from her own relative to make one quick phone call. Trusting the people standing closest to her. If that is you. Read the paperwork before the plane boards. Check the dates. Keep the receipts. And subscribe. Because these stories have a way of reaching the exact person who is about to need them. The hearing got moved up after that. Because of the open abandonment report. The court wanted answers fast. So did I. And the closer we got to the date, the more desperate they grew. And desperation makes people careless. Uncle Wes was the crack in the dam. His auto shop in Grand Island was further gone than the family had let on. The bank had called his note. And his entire plan for staying afloat had been his share of the farm sale. Money he had been counting as good as banked for months. With the sale frozen, Wes was weeks from losing the shop he had built over 20 years. So Wes leaned on my father hard. And my father, who could not afford his own life, either leaned back. I heard about it second-hand. From a cousin who had finally started to wonder why the loving son was so frantic to sell his confused mother's land. Their lawyer kept building the story that I was the schemer. The lonely niece who had locked grandma away on a farm to seize her estate. He repeated it so often I think he came to believe it himself. What their lawyer did not know, because his clients had not told him, was that there was no estate to seize. No deed in their favor. No secret document I was hiding. There was only an old woman who owned her own land. A court that would decide who could be trusted with her. And 30 seconds of footage of my father checking his watch as he walked away. They were arguing about the contents of a safe that did not exist. While I held the only thing that was actually real. I almost felt sorry for the lawyer. He had been hired to defend a story. And his own clients had handed me the facts. Some fights you win in the room. This one I had already won. I just had to walk in and let everyone see it. The night before the hearing, my grandmother had one of her hard nights. As if she could feel the air tightening even though no one had told her a thing. She woke a little after midnight. Frightened. Asking for Walter. Asking why the house was so dark. I did what I always did. I sat on the edge of her bed and took her hands in mine. And I worked the lavender cream into them. The same scent she had once rubbed into mine after a long day of weeding. The world turned all the way around now. So that the child was the one studying the grandmother. Somewhere in that year I had stopped being the girl she comforted. And become the woman who comforts her. And neither of us had marked the day it changed. She calmed under my hands. Then she started to hum that old hymn. Low and certain. The one Walter used to sing in the garden. And without quite deciding to, I hummed it with her. The two of us in the dark. In a farmhouse her family was trying to sell out from under her. At the end of it she looked at me with a flash of that terrible beautiful clarity. And she asked me a question I will hear for the rest of my life. Are they coming back, she said. I knew exactly who she meant. Even if she did not. I held her hands a little tighter. And I told her the truth. The only promise I have ever been completely sure I could keep. No, I said. But I am. Every time. She nodded like that was enough. And she slept. And I sat there until the window went grey. Knowing that in a few hours I would not need to raise my voice at all. The paper would do it for me. The Buffalo County Courthouse is a solid old building with marble floors that carry sound. And on the morning of the hearing the hallway outside the courtroom was full of my family. My parents had dressed for it. My father wore the grey suit he saved for funerals and big sales. And my mother wore pearls and the carefully composed face of a woman who has been wronged. Uncle Wes paced near the water fountain. Unable to hold still. Checking his phone every 30 seconds. Their lawyer worked the group in low confident tones. And there, against the far wall, on a wooden bench, sat my grandmother, in the blue dress she liked, with Marion Doyle on one side and Mr. Howerton on the other. I had worried all night about bringing her. Whether the chaos would frighten her. I should not have. While my father straightened his tie, and my mother rehearsed her sad face, and my uncle wore a hole in the marble. My grandmother sat perfectly still in the middle of all of it. Hands folded in her lap. Humming. That same old hymn. Soft and steady. Filling the hallway like it was a garden. And not a courthouse. The contrast was not lost on a single person standing there. The people who claimed to be falling apart from worry over her could not stand still. The woman they had abandoned was the calmest soul in the building. My father would not look at her. My mother could not stop looking at her. And when the bailiff opened the doors and called the matter of the guardianship and conservatorship of Edith Granger, I took my grandmother's humming hand, helped her to her feet, and I walked her in myself. Whatever happened in that room, she would not sit alone in it. Not ever again. They went first. And they went hard. Their lawyer was good. I will give him that. He stood and painted a portrait of a devoted son and his loyal wife. A couple who had sacrificed their own retirement to care for an ailing mother in their home for a full year. Only to have a resentful isolated niece swoop in. Snatch the vulnerable woman away to a remote farm. Cut off her loving family. And position herself to control an estate. He used words like unstable. And undue influence. And deeply concerning. He noted that I worked nights. Lived alone. And had no children of my own to occupy me. As if my whole life were evidence of a deficiency. My father took the stand. And was magnificent at it. He let his voice crack at exactly the right moment. He talked about how hard the year had been. How worried he was for Mom's safety way out on that farm with just Dana. How he only wanted what was best for her. He never once mentioned an airport. My mother dabbed her eyes. Wes nodded along too vigorously. I sat at our table with my grandmother's hand in mine, her thumb moving in slow circles against my palm. And I felt the courtroom tilting their way. Felt the judge, a sharp-eyed woman named Peterson, taking it in with a neutral face. This is the part where in the version of me from a year before, I would have stood up and started yelling the truth. Hot and desperate and lost. But I had learned something in that lounge. And every night since. The loud one in the room is rarely the one telling the truth. So when Judge Peterson finally turned to me and asked whether I wished to respond to the petition, I did not raise my voice. I stood up quietly. And I opened the binder. I told the court I was a registered nurse with 12 years in geriatric care, dating back to my first job as a nurse's aide at 19. And I entered my license and my credentials into the record, because suitability was the question, and competence was my answer. Then one document at a time. I let my family's own work speak. I entered the unsigned draft listing agreement from Prairie Line Realty, dated 3 weeks before the so-called family trip. My father's name typed into the seller's line, offering for sale a farm that belonged to the living woman sitting beside me. I entered the airline records, showing a one-way ticket purchased 11 days before that trip, in my grandmother's name, to a city she had no connection to and no one waiting in. I entered my mother's voicemail, and let the courtroom hear her own voice say the words. She will not even know we are gone. I entered the physician's capacity evaluation, and my dated care log. Every hard night accounted for in plain ink. And then last, I asked the court to watch 30 seconds of video. The bailiff dimmed the lights. The footage played on the screen. My father crouching, taking her hands, standing, walking away, and halfway across that lounge, with his mother sitting alone behind him, lifting his wrist to check his watch. I heard someone in the gallery gasp. I did not turn around. Marion Doyle testified next, calm and devastating, to her findings, and to 30 years of telling the difference between a family that breaks and a family that plans. Then Teresa, the gate agent, took the stand and told the court in a shaking voice that the well-dressed man had assured her someone would be along for the older lady. Through all of it I stayed standing. And I stayed quiet. And I let the paper do what paper does. When I finally sat down, the courtroom that had been tilting toward them an hour earlier had gone completely, perfectly silent. They had built their whole case on the idea that no one would ever connect the dots. I had simply laid the dots in a row and turned on the lights. That is when my father broke, the way I had known he would. Because men like my father can survive anything except being seen. He came up out of his chair before his lawyer could stop him. His composure gone. His voice loud enough to make the bailiff move. "This is exactly what I am talking about," he shouted. "She is manipulating all of you. She has turned this into a circus to steal what is rightfully mine. Rightfully mine." The whole room heard it. And Wes panicked half a row beside him, and said the rest of it out loud. The part their lawyer had spent weeks burying. "We needed that sale, Ray. We are out of time. The bank is not going to wait." There it was, in front of the judge, in their own mouths. Not her welfare. The sale. The debt. The clock. I stood back up. And I did not match his volume. I went the other way. The angrier he got, the quieter I became, until the whole courtroom had to lean in to hear me, which meant they leaned away from him. I looked at my father, and I said evenly, You told her just sit here. We will check in and come right back. I let it land. You did come back. For the farm. Not for her. Then I turned to my mother, who had stopped dabbing her eyes. You said she would not even know you were gone. I held her gaze until she dropped it. She knew exactly who walked away. And she knew exactly who came back. My father was still standing, breathing hard, with nothing left to say that would not make it worse. His own lawyer had a hand on his arm trying to get him to sit down. My grandmother, through all of it, had kept humming, soft and unbothered, in her chair beside our table. The one calm thing in a room full of people losing control. Judge Peterson looked at the shouting son, and the panicking brother, and the weeping wife, and then at the quiet old woman humming a hymn, and at me, standing there with my hands folded and my binder closed. She picked up her gavel. She did not need long. Judge Peterson ruled from the bench, which Howerton told me afterward she rarely does, with a full written order to follow. She found that Edith Granger was indeed incapacitated and in need of protection. The one thing both sides agreed on. Then she found that the petitioners, my father and my uncle, were unsuitable to serve. And she used plain words for it. She said the evidence showed they had not acted in the ward's interest, but in their own financial interest. That abandoning a vulnerable adult in an airport was in her words as clear a disqualification as this court has seen. And that a man who would do that to his mother could not be trusted with her person or her property. She denied their petition in full. She appointed me, Dana Granger, as both guardian and conservator of my grandmother, with the authority to decide her care and to manage her property for her benefit and hers alone. And she made it clear, looking directly at my father, that no petition to sell the farm to satisfy anyone's debts would find a friendly ear in her courtroom. Then she did one more thing. She directed that the Adult Protective Services findings, and the airport footage, and the records, be forwarded to the county attorney's office to review whether criminal charges for abandonment and neglect of a vulnerable adult should follow. That part was not up to me. And I want you to understand. I never asked for it. I only ever asked to keep my grandmother. But the law, it turns out, has its own opinions about leaving an 82-year-old woman in an airport. My father did not look at me as he left. He did not look at his mother either, which somehow hurt worse. He had walked into that courtroom certain that the closest blood would win. He walked out having learned that blood was never the question. The question was who showed up. The fallout was real and measurable. And none of it was the kind of revenge that needs a raised voice. With the farm frozen and no sale to count on, Uncle Wes lost the auto shop within 2 months. The bank took it, the way banks do. And the family stopped pretending that had not always been the engine driving everything. My parents never bought the condo in Scottsdale. The down payment they had been so sure of had been 160 acres that were never theirs to spend. The county attorney's review moved slowly, the way those things do. But the referral alone rearranged the family overnight. Suddenly the relatives, who had been so certain I was the unstable one, had questions. And then, watching that footage make its quiet rounds, they had answers. The story my parents had told so well for so long finally met the one thing it could not survive, which was simply being looked at in full. I did not gloat. There is no satisfaction in watching your own father become a cautionary tale. There is only a strange tired grief underneath the relief. But I will tell you what I did feel. Clean. And certain. Driving back west toward Kearney that evening with the guardianship papers on the passenger seat. They had spent a year trying to lose one old woman to gain a piece of land. They lost the land. And they lost each other. And somehow they still managed to lose her too. And I had her. I had her all along. I brought my grandmother home to the farm for good. Which legally she had never left. But now no one could come for her again. Spring came on the way it does out there. All at once. After months of nothing. And the first warm Saturday, I took her out to the back where her lavender rose had gone grey and wild. I cut them back hard. The way she had taught me. Scared the whole time that I was killing them. She sat in a kitchen chair I had carried out to the yard. Watching my hands. And told me again that lavender is the one plant that smells better after you cut it down to almost nothing. I understood her finally. Some things have to be cut back to the bone before they can come back stronger. We replanted what would not recover. And within a few weeks there was green where the grey had been. And the bees found us. And the whole back lot started to smell like my entire childhood. One morning I came out with 2 cups of coffee. And I found her already there. In her chair. Face turned up to the sun. When she heard me she opened her eyes. And she looked at me with that rare clear gaze the disease still gave back now and then. Like a gift it could not fully take. There you are, she said. I knew you would come back. She had said the same words in an airport lounge on the worst day of my life. This time I sat down in the grass beside her chair. Handed her the warm cup. And I let myself believe her. I had come back. And I was not going anywhere. She passed 2 autumns later. In her own bed. In the farmhouse she had humped her way home to. Holding my hand. With the window open so she could smell the last of the lavender that year. She did not know my name at the end. But she knew my hand. And that was enough. That was always enough. I left the hospital system that year. And I used what I knew to build something small in Kearney. In a storefront on a quiet street downtown. I called it the Garden Room. It is a coffee shop mostly. But really it is a memory cafe. A place where families with someone like my grandmother can come and sit and be known. And not be a burden to anyone. There is lavender in pots in the front window. Cut from her rose. The old folks hum behind the counter about a man named Walter singing in a garden. And when a new face asks who he is, I get to say his name out loud. It is not a fortune. It is a life. It is hers. Growing in me. If there is one thing I want you to take from all of this, it is that family is not the people who promise they will be right back. Family is the ones who actually come back. And keep coming back. On the worst nights. When no one is keeping score. And there is nothing left to gain. That is the whole thing. That is the only thing. That is my story. One lounge. One promise nobody meant to keep. And one quiet woman who refused to throw away anything they handed her. If this story reached you tonight. If you are the one who shows up in your family. If you are tired and outnumbered and wondering whether what you are doing matters. It matters. I promise you it matters. Somewhere right now there is a grandmother humming in a chair. Waiting for the one person who actually comes back. Be that person. And if this story moved you even a little. Do me one small thing before you go. Hit that like button so the next quiet woman carrying her whole family alone finds her way to this story when she needs it most. Subscribe so you do not miss the next one. Because there are more of these. So many more. And the ones still coming are stories I have never told another soul. And in the comments tonight. Tell me one thing. Tell me the name of the person in your family who actually shows up. Say their name out loud. Right here. Where the rest of us can read it. Because the people who keep coming back deserve to be named. Stay warm out there. I will see you on the next one.